and do accept the Chinese values, which does not mean that we do not accept the other civilization values, such as the Indian, African, or Latin American. Based on this approach, we treat the Western civilization of today, because the elites today have been destroying their civilization. It is not the peak of their development, it is degradation, which has been brought about by their leaders, while we are the protectors of the values that existed in the Western civilization in the past. So we are not fighting the West. We support the traditional values. It is important that people of the real West, of the real Europe, are present here among us. And now, just to move to the subject matter of this discussion, I need to say that this approach is based on vast geopolitical areas of Russia and Eurasia, of China, including their participation in the One Path, One Belt project, and it is the Islamic world, which includes lots of countries. It is Africa, which is now at a new stage of decolonization. That's why the presence of the grandson of the great Mandela symbolizes a really historic step forward. And the same applies to Latin America. All of it includes vast spaces, so that multipolarity means that there are not only two poles for land service and sea service, but there are huge worlds with their geopolitical features. The Chinese world, the Russian world, the African world, the Latin American world, the Islamic world. And ultimately, I hope that the liberated West will join us after it releases itself of the current degradation. There was a time when the West managed to conquer mankind. Our mission now is to liberate the West, to get rid of the West hegemony, which has been abused by the West based on their model. At this point, I will finish my introduction, and I invite you to try and think about the guidelines of multipolarity. Now all of us have the best representatives of the intellectual elite of these civilizations are discussing this new world order. Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to the famous muse of the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs. It is Mrs. Maria Zakharova, who symbolizes the beauty and delicacy of the great Russian national culture. Thank you very much. Nobody has ever called me like this, but I do appreciate this introduction. Thank you very much. I will stick to my text because my time is limited. I do not want to move away from the key subject matter of this discussion. For a couple of times, I will refer to some of the products of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. The thing is that my father sometimes says that the time schedule that advertising can only work when the product that is being advertised is really good. But if it is bad, then you can't promote it. And I should say that everything that was laid down at a theoretical and practical level, everything that is called by somebody as a trendy thing or as something else, has been described by Russian diplomats, not only diplomats, but many others. And Petr Sherbakov, who has shaped this system, has heard some uh, attempts to make fun of his approach. But what has come as a result of the unification of first BRIC countries and then BRICS countries means that after the early 1990s, when this country was fully dependent on the traditional Western basic principles, which did not work anymore. And that is why I can promote our ministry. I will start with the foreign policy of Russia that was adopted in 2023. It is quite a unique policy. I would call it a philosophic declaration. I mean, the fact that it is a kind of manifesto. It is based on philosophic communities to become a kind of manifestation. This document, with your permission, I would say that it is a diplomatic document or anti-diplomatic document because there are opportunities to criticize it. The concept of the foreign policy of Russia developed in 2023 sharpens all the attitudes that existed, moving Russia towards the forefront. It is not a simple declaration, it is a program of fighting for future transformation of the world. Now we are developing this approach, and in a couple of years, you will see how it works. This concept includes 9 principles on which the multipolar system should be based. It is multipolarity, polycentricity. I know that there are different approaches, but we're speaking about the same multilateral nature in the genuine and Western meaning of the word. Actually, the principle of equality has been recorded in the UN declaration documents. First of all, it is the modern principle of multipolar structure of the world. Somebody may say that Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations refers to the equality of all the members of the UN, and somebody may say that the other systems too rely on such principles, but it is not exactly so. And the thing is that these principles have not worked in full up to the moment. These are modern principles of international relations, but in reality, they are being violated on a regular basis. With your permission, I will refer to some specific facts. For instance, the collective West countries today quite officially have 17 colonies. I'm not talking now about colonialism as the underlying principle of Western philosophy. No, there are 17 colonies, and they do not, and those the Western countries do not report to any authority. I am not going to list all of them. The second principle, according to the concept, is non-acceptance of hegemony in international affairs. This is a principle describing a future system of polycentricity and multipolarity. And once again, I refer to our products at 8 p.m. on Saturday. Our magazine devoted to the subject will have a program on this subject. If you look at the collective West, that is to say, the global minority, and the normal attitude for them is not multipolarity. It is exactly hegemony. Then they are not shy to admit it. They actually boast of it. They believe that it is based on their ownership of breakthrough technologies. The third principle is cooperation based on mutual interests and profits to be generated. And many of the principles about economic equality and the others do not mean what they are called. And it is a great example of what is being done in the framework of the BRICS countries, because the BRICS countries have a general system of relations without any violence that can be applied to anybody, referring to its normal nature. But today, at the beginning of the 21st century, we say that the existence of pluralism is not a normal attitude, is a norm, but an abnormality. And in the West now, they say that if you move away from this principle, you should be cancelled. The fourth principle is non-interference in domestic affairs of various countries. For instance, this subject is being declared in many documents, including the United Nations. However, there are different approaches to it. Even according to the most moderate calculation, starting from the early 19th century, the United States of America only have tried to change domestic situation in many countries in at least 150 states of the globe. We have a representative of Syria attending our meeting today who was fighting for it. It wasn't just an isolated case of aggression against Syria. It was a 2-year long attempt at occupying and invading the country and destroying its life in order simply to profit from its resources and to have one more point on the global map to be able to influence the region. I will not be talking now about Libya or Yugoslavia. You know more details than I do, but it is just that of late we have been only referring mostly to the United States and the UK, but France is no better. We are just back from our tour of Africa, and we have seen what French hegemony means for the African continent. Just imagine what kind of question was asked of Minister Sergei Lavrov when we were in Chad. A local journalist asked both ministers whether the relations between Chad and Russia may have an impact on the relations between Chad and France. And then the minister went absolutely furious. Just think what the world is like where you live. We have been enjoying many decades of friendship and cooperation. Russia does not come to us with empty hands. It comes as a good partner which helps us to improve the prosperity of our population. And the journalist who asked this question is now living using Western narratives. And when the foreign minister of Chad said that it wasn't what Chad had been fighting for and having bloodsheds, the audience, and there were lots of people there, the audience broke into an applause. And the fifth principle is the rule of law, in the rule of international law, and the absence of double standards, which is quite important today. Double standards or the absence of standards means the world order based on certain rules that the West has been imposing on the nations of the world. Where has this term come from? I would just like to remind all of you, including our internet audience,
the rule-based order. So there's been a surge of interest towards the thesis, which happened in 2023. What happened during this time? It's an intervention of the US and the so-called anti-Iraqi coalition into Iraq. So they were hoping to find an excuse for doing this. There was no UN resolution. Russia vetoed, like all the other countries, and it didn't allow for Iran to be captured this way by using the international law. And that's why they needed a thesis. And this thesis appeared, that motto came around to be, and then it started growing quite successfully, quote, end of quote. And I am ironic when telling this. I'm not going to tell you more about the rules-based order, because this is a buzzword that we'll discuss. Another principle, it's the inseparability of security in global and regional aspects. What does that mean? Let me give you a specific example. For how many years the Organization of Security and Cooperation functions? For 50 years. It also deals with transatlantic issues and the principles of inseparability of security. As soon as they decided to go away from that principle practically and to experiment with this, to actually separate the security and safety of the western part of Europe and to single out the safety of Russia, not taking it into account its values and interests. What happened? The Ukraine happened. A whole state was put to the knife because of the Western apologema that the security can be separated. It can be ours and not ours. So the inseparability of security in Russian, I think, has a very good analogy, a very good synonym. Whatever you cry out will echo back. That's how we say. That's the saying we have. Now, there is also a seventh principle, the diversity of cultures, and going away from forcing other development models, ideologies, or values, and leaning on single secular systems and religious systems and moral orientations. I think this is one of the most important, again, according to this historical context, principles that we spoke about today, and we'll say more of that later on. And now, let me tell about the final principle. Two last principles: a responsible leadership of the leading states, aimed at stable and favorable development conditions for both themselves and other nations and countries. And let me explain here what is meant by that. Responsible leadership of leading states. What do we have for now? It's not just an irresponsible leadership, it's a conscientiously propaganda of irresponsibility as a norm of existence. I'll allow myself of quoting Madeleine Albright, who once said in 1998, if the US has to use the force, it's because, and you can logically suppose necessary, it's because it's important or something, or it's because it's responsible. It's because, she said, if we have to use force, it's because we are America. That's what Madeleine Albright said. We are an indispensable nation. We are, she said, stand tall and we see further than other countries into the future. Today, this country, the US, had faced a lot of existential threats around itself. And those existential threats, the way I see them now, have not trampled the nation to the ground just because the founding fathers have put down a very solid foundation. They could never think what could happen with their inheritance by the liberal Democrats in the 21st century, what the liberal Democrats would do with that. The society is not just separated. There's a lot of hatred that is being cultivated in the society. Moreover, it serves as the basis of the American democratic process. The lack of an ideology as such, it doesn't really matter what kind of ideology, a state-based ideology, has been replaced by the drugs, by their legalization, and by other kind of drugs, and a moral void of the whole nation. They're not even in search for themselves. Previously, they were searching for themselves. Now they're not doing it anymore. Financially, should I remind you? What's the state debt of the US? Should I remind you that? Some people cannot even utter these numbers. 30, 40, how many? 35, you say, trillion USD. But that's not the problem. They can have a bigger debt, and who doesn't have a debt? It's just that the domestic product of the US is lower than the external debt, and that's not the biggest woe. Even the biggest woe is that the currency it is all denominated at is not guaranteed by real economy, is not secured by real economy, and the bubbles that we see inflating, they burst on a regular basis, leading to global crises and to other tragedies around the globe, and huge countries and regions cannot overcome them alone, and that's why the G20 had been created as a response to an American crisis that's been an American doing because of the American real estate market in 2008. Allow me to conclude my intervention reminding you of the main UN principles, reminding you on the leading role of states in the area of supporting global peace and security. That's what the UN Charter talks about, and many other international documents. How can we talk about contributing to peace and security where the NATO countries, the global minority, supplies weapons? Just think about it. Just think about it. Supply weapons to a terroristic regime. And they do it, and this is the most atrocious part, they do it in an uncontrollable way. Yesterday or the day before yesterday, I saw a quote, and I don't remember which year it belongs to, a recent one. It was said by a foreign minister of one of the Middle East countries, the Persian Bay. He was speaking at an international forum, and he said, I'm going to switch to English so that you, out there, were not... He wasn't antagonistic to the Anglo-Saxon word, but he wanted to communicate his thought precisely. He said, I'm going to switch to the English language so that you could clearly hear me there in the western part of Europe, he said. Just remember and see for yourself. In a couple of years, it's the western part of Europe that will become the major supplier, he said, of international terrorism. And I subscribe to these words, he said. The terrorists will use the weapons that the United States of America had been supplying to the Kiev regime. These weapons are already in the western part of Europe, and these weapons, the armaments, can be found already in the north part of Africa, in the Middle East, if the northern Africa and the Middle East, and I'm sorry to say that, unfortunately, had been suffering from international terrorism for many years, Europe had been suffering from international terrorism in a one-off basis and had never been a source of international terrorism. Now it will become one. And they don't even see that coming. They know only how to change avatars in their social network accounts, where when terrorist attacks happen in certain places, when they do that, they're not feeling sorry sincerely. They don't really know what it means to become a country where there is a powerful terroristic cell active. Those terroristic cells are already there, and they will continue to disrupt Europe more and more. And the Western Europe does no longer hold an immunity against that. There's no supremacy of law. There's no legality. There's no morals. Take religion. Religion would have held that down. It's been trampled. It's been completely downsized and destroyed. People are demoralized. They cannot separate the good from the evil. And in the end, I'll give you a couple of quotes from some of the greatest wise men and philosophers. Nikolai Danilevsky used to write, "The humanity is diverse, and it consists of a whole range of culturally and historical types." When did he live? The Russians know it. I'll remind you. 1885. What is it if not a multipolarity bill born? He said the terrorism brings a threat to the whole humanity because it neglects the multitude of cultures. De-Europeized people lose the sense of patriotism. They start despising everything original and national. Which year did he say that? In 1920, 100 years ago. And how relevant it is now. Just look at the Ukraine that have forgotten its history, that has forgotten its heroes, and that had lost itself as a country, as a people, as a community. And finally, I'm going to give you the quote of Lev Gumilov. The idea of exclusivity is foreign to Russian people. Or let me quote Fyodor Dostoevsky here as well, which marked that if French have pride, the love towards something nice, the Spaniards have fairness, Germans have accuracy, Russians have the ability to accept and understand all other nations. Now, referring to the question that everybody has an absolute, a category of absolute, we also have it. But we have yet another quality and another feature. We respect the others in an absolute way. Thank you very much for listening. I am extremely thankful to you, dear colleagues. Unfortunately, our time is very limited. I'd like to ask all the other speakers so that everybody has time to stay within the time frame allotted, 5 minutes, no more. Now the floor is being given to our distinguished guest from South Africa. He is and chairman of International Roosevelt Movement. Please, Mr. Mandela.
It is an honor for me to be here. Allow me to acknowledge the moderator, fellow panelists, as well as the Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is indeed a privilege for me to be here with you in the midst of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, addressing the philosophy and geopolitics of the multipolar world. Our gathering occurs at a historical junction in human history, and our struggle for multipolarity is neither philosophical nor are the geopolitics of the world fully aligned for achieving multipolarity. The mere act of addressing multipolarity is the contest, the hegemony of the old order. It is easy to conceive of philosophy as an abstract subject of geopolitics, as a dynamic set of conditions that affect all of us in one way or another. Collectively, we are responsible of the development of the language and instruments that can give expression to multipolarity. To do so, we must address both local and international challenges. Let me perhaps posit a statement that best summarizes the reality of multipolarity and why it is imperative that we must not only adopt it as a philosophy, but also ensure that we begin to shape the global discourse that advances our common goals and aspirations. The bold statement that I wish to make here today is that we are already well advanced into World War III, and it is evidence in every sphere of human endeavor: political, social, economic, technological, and ideological. Whichever way we wish to look at it, multipolarity engages the central question of the survival of humanity. What is at stake is our very humanity, and hence the conflict that are raging in the world are born out of a unipolar philosophy which threatens all of us as a collective. Politically, the world order, driven by the military-industrial complex, has brought us to the precipice of disaster. Palestine is a case in point, with a genocide playing out in full view of the entire world, yet $14 billion in additional weapons is on its way to apartheid Israel, despite an ICJ order to stop the genocide. Let me come a bit closer to home. In the past 2 weeks of the governing parties of BRICS, countries have lost their outright majority, 2 of them for that matter. Of course, they have 2 different sets of contexts and may well be dismissed as purely circumstantial. Let me just reflect on South Africa and why it is critical that we intensify our efforts to advance and consolidate multipolarity in the world. The birth of our democracy 3 decades ago, just before the inauguration of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in 1997, marked not only our triumph over apartheid regime, but also over its supporters, mainly the Western imperialism. Over the past 3 decades, the old order consolidated their economic, political power in South Africa and have been the enemies of transformation. They have fought against land redistribution and regularly waved the finger of corruption, whilst remaining the owners and beneficiaries of the land, mineral resources, and means of production. If you think multipolarity is an abstract, you need to look no further than the correspondence that was directed to the USA by our largest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. And in the wake of South Africa's case of genocide against apartheid Israel, the adoption of the US-South Africa Bilateral Relations Review Act. In the wake of our recent elections, corporates, South Africa has been lobbying hard for the coalition between the largest opposition party and the African National Congress. This is the hypocrisy of the old world order, the same hypocrisy that flies the flag of Ukraine, yet in an arch supporter of apartheid Israel and its genocide in Palestine. This is the same hypocrisy that keeps Africa enslaved despite its vast mineral wealth and its people perpetually underdeveloped. The philosophy and geopolitics of the unipolar world is rooted in unequal relations, which is also rooted in hypocrisy and the denial of common humanity. The survival of humanity, whether against the challenges of climate change, food security, hunger, as well as malnutrition, can only be secured through a more just world order underpinned by the new and emerging philosophy and geopolitical of multipolarity. For us, it means we shall never abandon the legacy of His Excellency President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela and our national democratic revolution that strives for a non-racial, non-sexist, free and just South Africa in which all can enjoy prosperity. For Africa, it means that we continue to strive to unite our continent and to ensure that we are no longer the instruments of our own exploitation And you are witnessing this in Niger, Burkina Faso, as well as in Mali. For Palestine, it means that we shall continue to mobilize the global south and all freedom-loving people of the world under one single goal, that freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians. Perhaps it is time for the world to return to that great African proverb, Umtu ngumtu ngabantu. I am because we are. We walk this path together towards a more just multipolar world, or perish at the precipice of hypocrisy and unipolarity. Thank you.
Благодарю вас. А это могло бы быть прекрасным лозунгом.
It could have been a great motto. We are, the world exists because we are here. And I'd like to give the floor to Konstantin. I'll try to be quite brief. I wanted to focus on the fact that the philosophy of a multipolar world is very simple. It implies that we are all equal, and if it is the philosophy of a unipolar world, it means that we are not equal. There are people who are better than all the others, and those who are better believe that they belong to another selected race. We know that the racist theory was not born in Germany. It was developed in the United Kingdom, and it was so because they had crowned the queen in Delhi. And based on their racist theory, exactly that theory, the world turned unipolar, because people who believe that they are more important and they are better than anybody else started selling people for slavery and so on. And today, the Minister of Defense of Israel calls Palestinians as animals. So racism has not disappeared, and the multipolar world is different from the U.S. hegemony of a unipolar world. That a multipolar world, it means we are all equal. We are all human beings, and as Nkosi Mandela has just said, we all represent the same mankind. Apostle Paul, as you can recall, said, there are no aliens, no Jews, no Christians, because our Orthodox religion, based on our self-identification in Russia, calls on us to treat everybody as a brother. And this is essentially the philosophy of a multipolar world. This is our absolute, and this is why we understand that our multipolar world is not a Russia-centric world. It is a world where every nation, every country has the same right to exist, because we are all equal, and we will not let anybody believe that they are more equal than we are. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to a representative of another important civilization, Professor Chang Weiwei, who is the author of the Civilization of State term. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Dugin. It's not easy to discuss philosophy in 5 minutes. I will try. And I'm very glad that I read the news report, Russian President, Mr. Putin, mentioned the Chinese model. And he said the China model obviously is better than the American model, which I agree 100%. And so I will perhaps start with discussing the rise of China, more importantly, the Chinese model, its philosophical outlook behind the China model as a way to explain how China has made it. And indeed, there are quite a few features of the Chinese philosophical tradition and outlook. Number one is it's very much concerned with doing, practicing, experimenting. In other words, philosophers ask two types of questions. One is to be, what is the real meaning of life, or what ought to be, in a normative sense, what ought to be the ideal society. Yeah. And China also has this tradition, but China has another tradition which is very strong and stronger than the first two traditions, which is about to do. To do is to be. Yeah. Doing itself, experiment itself, is normative and itself produce values. As Chairman Mao famously said, if you want to learn swimming, jump into the water, into the pond, and you will learn it. So this is how we conduct our BRI. When Belt and Road Initiative was first put forward by President Xi Jinping, people said it's so vague, no roadmap, no exact criteria for membership, whatever. This is very much Chinese approach. We have not a roadmap, but we have a general orientation, a compass. Yeah, we know this is the right direction. And then in the process, we just do it. We summarize experiences, and gradually a roadmap came out. So this is how China has done along the way of the past few decades. The other philosophical tradition is it's very much down to earth and people's livelihood oriented. In other words, you have to, whatever economic, social, cultural, other political policies, they should all boil down to deliver tangible things for your people, both material and non-material. So this is also very important. And number three is this holistic approach to everything. We start from overall picture and then into details. As a result, for instance, we always discuss this issue of Dao, which means the overall objective, and Shu, specifics. Dao always governs the Shu. So that's how we can make reforms. China now is expert in reform. We reform ourselves every year, every month, every day. We call the whole past 4 or 5 decades a year of reform. So we try to improve ourselves. And this holistic approach and this people's livelihood centered means we can plan. It's very much both philosophical tradition and this can-do spirit, and then deliver to the people. For instance, now China is the leader in EV revolution, renewable energies. This EV automobile industry is a result of 4 5-year plans, 20 years. We learned this from the Soviet Union. But we did not adopt this abstract principle. We try to, what we call the practice is the criteria of truth. So everything has to be verified by facts, by results, whether they can deliver better things for the people. So we started with this, we call strategic planning, not mandatory planning, not you plan a factory, how many shoes you are going to produce, but you plan for strategic orientation for EV industry. That's a must. Then each 5-year plan, you make readjustments accordingly. Yeah. And then with this kind of approach, I think it will have, a positive implication perhaps for our joint effort to build a multipolar international order. And for instance, I'm thinking of this Eurasian continent and our cooperation, economic integration. There are so many projects. If we have this right orientation and we just do it, in a way, something tangible, more meaningful, and roadmap will come out. Same with this North-South economic corridor. It's the right orientation. We just do it. And in the process, something roadmap will come out. And finally, I think, as so many Eurasian countries now call themselves civilizational states or civilizational communities, I think these civilizational states and civilizational communities differ a lot from the United States. The United States is known for its deep state. Yeah. Civilizational states are known for their deep peoples and deep cultures, and that's important. So we have, as Eurasian continent and countries, we have different civilizations, and these civilizations have long coexisted and cross-fertilized. And they all cherish their civilizational roots and cultural heritages, endorse diversity and harmony, reject unipolarity, reject Western self-defined universal values. And these countries, these states, these cultures all have their own traditions for their own way of life, for organizing family and society, for individual collective relationship, for state societal relationship, and for peace and prosperity. We know how to do it. Yeah. I think this kind of deep-rooted philosophical and civilizational roots that are driving the rapid rise of more humane and just multipolar world order to replace this outdated, unjust unipolar world order. So with this slightly optimistic note, I end my speech. Thank you.
Благодарю вас, профессор Чжанг Вэйвэй. Вот прекрасный.
Thank you, Professor Chang Wei. It's another great formula of multipolarity. Multipolarity is something to do. And now I'd like to give the floor to the representative of one more civilization. It is Mr. Atul Anesha, specialist in international relations of the Hindu.
To be in the midst of such an august audience. Since the time is short and a lot of points have already been covered, I will go more on the practical dimensions of how do we consolidate a multipolar world. The multipolar world has arrived. We know that it is built around civilizational poles across the globe. But how do we consolidate multipolarity? And I think it's time we think forward here, that in terms of geoeconomics of multipolarity, that how do we collaborate with each other in a manner that multipolarity solidifies. And I think over here, we've already made a start. We already made a start in terms of connectivity. We already know the Eurasian land bridge, the Belt and the Road Initiative was a project which knitted countries and people and created new growth engines in terms of connectivity, in terms of special economic zones, so in terms of industrialization of areas which were backward industrially, though culturally not so. I think we need to expand on the geoeconomic dimension over here, and there was a reference to the North-South corridor. I think that is very, very important of connecting Europe, Russia, Iran, and India. Along with that, you can have connectivity nodes extending into West Asia and North Africa. I don't like to use the word Middle East, but I think that's really the region which I'm talking about. And I do believe that we need to add another dimension apart from transport corridor to the North-South corridor. We need to add an energy corridor to it as well, which will bring, let's say, gas from Russia to Turkmenistan, and from Turkmenistan to Iran. And from Iran, probably you can take it to Chabahar and then take it as LNG towards India, or you can even build an undersea pipeline from Chabahar to Oman and then another undersea traction to Mumbai. So I think that it will just add another dimension to the North-South corridor, and it would help consolidate multipolarity. I think in this regard, it's very important to concentrate on Africa. And we need to work together with Africa's Agenda 2063 program of modernization of Africa, because for me, Africa is the future. It's the breadbasket of the world when it fully develops into its own. But it needs to industrialize. And I think over here, you need some specific projects. One is the revival of Lake Chad. 34 million people depend on livelihood on Lake Chad. But it's drying because of climate change and other reasons. You need to revive the lake, and that you can do by a grand project of diverting the waters of the Congo River in the direction of Lake Chad, because you will not only recreate the same livelihoods for these millions of people, you will create new transport corridors, waterways, which are going to be of importance to a large section of Africa. You have the Inga Dam project, for example. It can generate more electricity when it fully is developed, more than the Three Gorges Dam, which China has done so well. So if you have about 25,000 to 30,000 megawatt of electricity coming into the heart of Africa, it's going to industrialize a large part of Africa. I think the multipolar world order has to start thinking in terms of these concrete projects, because if we don't come together and consolidate economically, we should never underestimate those who are opposed to the multipolar world. They'll come back and they're famous for their regime changes, etc. They're going to do their best to exterminate this initiative of multipolarity of the BRICS Plus, which we're talking about right now. I think we need to go into also in terms of a world land bridge. As Professor Dugin mentioned, that our multipolarity model is not directed at anybody else. We only resist those who are trying to oppress us. But in the end, you have to have, let's say, the Americas, Alaska joining Siberia under the Bering Strait through a undersea corridor, which is possible to connect. And then you have Americas, Latin America coming together, and I mean it's too short a time, but there's a plan how to reconnect and take the Eurasian land bridge into a world land bridge, and I think that will be the time when multipolarity really flourishes and comes into its own. I have just one point here to make. I can see the ambassador of Syria here. I have a personal thing to say over here, because when I was a journalist covering the Arab Spring, I was inspired by his bold resistance to what was happening and defending his country and Syria, and of course the late Vitaly Churkin, they were the ones who aligned me to a path of freedom and multipolarity and the value of it. And that track has taken me into this forum. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to give the floor to the representative of an Islamic civilization, Ms. Hassan Safar from Levan, please.
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Thank you very much, Dr. Dugin. I'm a representative of humanity. I'd rather be. In talking about humanity, which lies at the heart of the philosophy and the geopolitics of a multipolar world, we believe that today more than ever, if we are to talk about the importance of humanity, we shouldn't turn a blind eye to what's going on in Gaza. Today, humanity is crucified, massacred, killed in Gaza. I read a report just today in the morning, and it said that 85% of children under the age of 5 spend 1 to 3 days without food. Where on earth could that happen? And we turn a blind eye to this. So it is very important today to focus on this particular issue and not just take it as a matter of pure news and politics. Yes, the fight against unipolarity ought to be active in every spot around the world and on various platforms and among a large swathe of diversified spectra. In this sense, I would talk about our region, the region that I come from, which is West Asia. The recent ongoing Israeli genocidal war against Gaza is a turning point towards a multipolar world. It is the fulcrum and the integral shaper of this new multipolar world. Israel is an American manufactured entity. The appetite country receives most of the American aid, especially economic and military aid, and of course, an aggressive media coverage, the formulation and the inculcating of a twisted narrative. Israel has been the largest cumulative recipient of the US foreign aid since its founding, receiving around $310 billion. It is also an advanced military base for American presence in our region. It is propagated as the so-called only Western democracy in an Arab region. It is a pure embodiment of American hegemony and influence in our transitioning resourceful region. Yes, it is today more than ever a pariah state in our Arab region, which is the only entity that participates in Eurovision competitions. Today, more than ever, this American influence is in an ebb. It is waning. And more, especially after the Russian special military operation in Ukraine and the Israeli aggression against Gaza and South Lebanon. Today, we shifted more than ever, whether in Russia or even in Lebanon, in Gaza and elsewhere, we shifted to preemptive steps and policies of defending our lands. The shift towards multipolarity requires getting rid of unipolarity, and the embodiment of this unilateralism in our region is Israel. And therefore, whoever fights Israel is fighting the unipolar project in the region. This has to be underlined, this has to be underscored, and this has to be focused on. So therefore, we must stand up today more than ever on the right side of history. And of course, with humanity, this has always been our side of the story, and we should support everyone who confronts and fights the unipolarity project in the region, and support this by all and every means. We should support it economically, we should support it militarily, politically, in the media-wise, and culturally. After all, Dr. Dugan always said something which is very important, and I cherish and highlight. Humanity is us, not them. This is very important to highlight. And allow me to finish with a verse from the Quran. And it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, In yansurkum Allah fala ghaliba lakum. When God helps you, none can overcome you. Thank you. Спасибо.
Пожалуйста.
Я хотела бы прокомментировать, не столько прокомментировать.
Like to comment, or rather to refer to your idea in two phrases, if you, with your permission, after our friend from Lebanon has addressed us. She spoke about the sufferings of children and multipolarism, then that we should be on the right side of history. How can we understand where is the right side of history? Well, obviously, how can we be sure that we are on the right side of history? Each particular person. I have a formula for this purpose. You may try and test this formula at home. Try to apply this formula to yourselves to make sure whether you're on the right or wrong side of history. If in order to determine your attitude to the sufferings and massacre or violence against children, you need additional information regarding the child's nationality or religion or faith. You are on the wrong side of history. This is a universal formula for making sure whether we are on the right side of history. And one more phrase that I'd like to mention now. Quite often analysts, political strategists, and other experts use regarding Ukraine, Near East, Gaza, etc. There is another formula that I would suggest, and it would be interesting for me to hear your opinion about it. To my mind, what is happening with Gaza, if we can compare it to anything, it is then the condition, the status of people in Donbass over more than 10 years now. Otherwise, certainly there haven't been 15,000 children built there over several months, but tens of thousands of people were killed or mutilated over 10 years. So this is just what makes it similar. But the difference between this situation is as follows. I have told you about the point of interface between these situations. However, the children of Donbass have been protected by Russia, and that's how they have got their right for the future. What the future will be like is certainly a very complex project. However, they do have it in Donbass. And when it comes to the children from Palestine, there have been attempts to protect them on the global arena, but I believe they are worthy of a better type of protection. Thank you. And now I'd like to give the floor to a representative of the Latin American civilization. It is Pepe Escobar, journalist and writer. He prefers calling himself a man of the world, but a man of a multipolar world.
Thank you, Alexander. No, I don't represent anything. I am a nomad. And if I represented somebody, it would be a Scythian from the 5th century BC. More appropriate. Okay, let's go back 2,000 years ago. Slightly different register. It's a long, dark night on the banks of the Danube. There is an army over there. They are camped out, ready for new battles. There is an emperor. The emperor is in his tent, and he's writing. You know who I'm talking about, Marcus Aurelius. He's writing the Meditations. So we have a Roman emperor paying tribute to Greek wisdom, and not Plato and Aristotle. He's paying his tribute to Zeno, Chrysippus, which even at the time, they were not very well known. But they were Stoics, they were brilliant, and they were, let's say, the pre-Greek equivalents of the Tao in China. They were Taoists, they were vitalists, they believed in life, they believed in inner strengths and inner equilibrium. They tried to understand themselves. And this is what the Roman emperor in question was trying to do at the time. Now, okay, fast forward 2,000 years. What do we get now in Europe? So-called apex of human civilization. I am more a product of Europe than Latin America. Even though I was born in Latin America, my culture, almost everything came from Europe. So now we have trashy Norwegian warmonger, and we have the toxic Medusa in Brussels as epitomizing the apex of Western civilization. So how come we went so wrong after 2,000 years? Now, we had everything. We had Leonardo, we had Michelangelo, we had Montaigne, we had Shelley, who wrote that poets are the unknown legislators of mankind. And now we have this. So forget about these people. It's don't waste, don't Eurasia as a whole. Don't waste your time with them. It's going to be a very, very sorry affair. The complete derailment of how European civilization was actually derailed by a so-called political leadership. The most important thing at the moment is to see how the multipolar world is being created right now in front of us. So, June 6, 2024, today. What did we have here in St. Petersburg? We had, for instance, starting at 9 a.m., an absolutely outstanding discussion about the Northern Sea route, which is going to be the death knell of the Suez Canal. It's going to take another few years, but it's inevitable. We had a discussion between the relationship between the Eurasian Economic Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, the ASEAN 10. So this could become, in a few years, once again, a union of economic blocs that they don't see themselves as blocs. They see themselves as complementary. So let's say EAEU represents the heartland and ASEAN represents the rimland. So economically, they are merging. And this has already started. Starts with some very simple moves. Let's do a free trade agreement with Vietnam. Done. Let's do a free trade agreement with Indonesia. They are doing it. Soon, they're going to have free trade agreements with all ASEAN 10. So this is how it works, step by step. Then we had an absolutely outstanding discussion about a philosophical concept, by the way, the Greater Eurasia Partnership, which I'm not sure a lot of people, even in Russia, know what it means. It was an idea that was first floated by President Putin in 2016, and Sergei Karaganov more or less conceptualized everything in 2018. It means what it says, a Greater Eurasia Partnership. This means Eurasia as a whole, the heartland, the rimland, from West Asia, Middle East doesn't exist. It's a stupid British concept. It's that from West Asia to Vladivostok, united, developing, building their corridors of connectivity, building interactions, building what the Chinese correctly describe as people-to-people's exchanges, which is basically, it was the essence of the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Roads. The ancient Silk Roads were Parthians, people from Xi'an, Venetians interacting and doing business. And now in the 21st century, you can do exactly the same thing. And the Chinese, of course, because they pay attention to their fabulous dynastic history, they understood that. And they had the means to implement something that President Putin had said before. The free trade area from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And the Chinese said, okay, we're going to do it from Xi'an to Madrid. And they have the means to do it. And that's what's so extraordinary. So I'll finish with the philosophy of June 6, 2024 in St. Petersburg. We were not discussing geoeconomics and geopolitics only. Of course, this forum is a geoeconomic forum and also a geopolitical forum. This is very, very serious. And that's why the West simply cannot understand what's going on here. People were discussing philosophical concepts. Greater Eurasia Partnership is a philosophical concept. The Belt and Road Initiative, apart from being a geoeconomics, is also a philosophical concept. It's an idea, and it's a flaming idea, an idea that keeps renewing itself all the time. So Marcus Aurelius, writing the Meditations in his by the campfire, nowadays we can say that we have Eurasian equivalents writing the future in flaming ideas in terms of how to build a more equanimous, fair, and legitimate international order. So forget about what they did in the past. Look about the future, and the future is Eurasia, and the future is here.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you so very much. But naturally, in this multipolar world and in this multipolar philosophy, we cannot exclude the West. We do not exclude the West and the US. And I'm so happy to give the floor to an amazing American dissident, Larry Johnson, please.
Thank you, Alexander. I'll be brief. I am from the state of Missouri, a fellow Missourian by the name of Mark Twain once said, "History does not repeat, but it rhymes." I'm giving you a rhyme today. BRICS and Leningrad. We stand in a city that now bears the name of St. Petersburg in ancient. 80 years ago, this was Leningrad. And here on this site, the Germans had tried to exterminate the Russian people. Is it not on? Is it on now? Yeah. I have a loud voice, so usually it works. The Germans tried to exterminate the Russian people. They surrounded the city. It was one of the few cities where Adolf Hitler expressed that he wanted to destroy the human population, the civilians, women, children, not just the soldiers. He failed. For 2.5 years, the citizens of Leningrad held out. They starved. They died of disease. But they maintained their hope that they would be free. And so you say, what does that have to do with BRICS? So here we are today with the so-called rules-based international order, which operates according to the golden rule. Those who have the gold make the rules, and the United States says that it has all the gold, so it's going to make the rules. And your responsibility, if you're not part of us, is either submit to sanctions, or we'll go to war with you, or we'll run a covert action to subvert your country. And so today, BRICS emerges, just like Leningrad, surrounded. But this is the rhyme. This is because history is not repeating itself. In 1942, it is true that the United States and Britain, on paper, were ostensible allies of the Soviet Union. Yet it was the Russian people alone that stood here in Leningrad, without the assistance of the British, without the assistance of the Americans. And it is ironic today, on June 6, 1944, that the United States and the Allies invaded into Normandy, and yet today, to commemorate this holiday, refuse to invite the Russians, who, were it not for Russia, the West would not have defeated Nazi Germany. Let's be clear about that. But here is how BRICS is different. Russia does not stand alone. Russia stands with China. Russia stands with India. Russia stands with Brazil. Russia stands with South Africa. And other countries are coming together under that. I am an American. I had 28 of my ancestors fight in the American Revolution. But I am ashamed of my country. My country is a bully. We no longer know the art of diplomacy. And I am frightened because I have heard senior members of the foreign ministry of Russia, who are mature, wise people, comment that they are not in communication with Americans. That is dangerous. And the reason they're not in communication with Americans is because my country, we are narcissists. We accept ourselves as superior to others, and it's a lie. So we live in a dangerous time, but BRICS stands in a way like Leningrad, but it's different. We don't have to have 800,000 dead as a memory. The key to Leningrad was you needed food. You needed money. And this is where BRICS offers the hope. Because Russia, albeit the smallest country in terms of population, is the largest in terms of resources. And combined with the Chinese, with the Indians, with the Brazilians, with the South Africans, they offer an opportunity for a new world order, and an order that I pray to God will be run that brings us peace. I thank you.
Благодарю вас. Но,
Thank you. Well, our multipolarity and our session would be absolutely symbolic unless we provide an opportunity to take the floor to representatives of Europe, where it all started and where it should bring hope to people. That's why I'd like to give the floor to Lorenzo Pacini from Italy. He will take the floor to speak about Italian multipolarity.
Works? Okay. Thank you so much for being here today, because it's a great honor as European, considering a question: where is Europe now? We are building a multipolar world, and no one of the European countries are inside all the partnerships. That's really weird. The multipolar Mediterranean could be an option, as it has been the womb of many civilizations and has been a center of an entire empire who dominated the culture of the West. But now we have such a kind of dinosaurs of geopolitics and international relations because they are stopped to the Atlantic treaties and nothing more. We have BRICS, we have SCO, we have many partnerships, and no one from Europe is participating. Which kind of future could we have in this sense? That's a question, because our politicians, I come from Italy, total disaster, but how can we solve this problem? There is a lack in geopolitical studies in Europe. We don't talk about multipolarity. We need an education in multipolar studies. We need it, because if we talk to the youth about another kind of world possible, they would be fascinated to that, because they feel it. They see they have no future. When I talk to my students, the first thing I see is that they are not able to look forward in more than 1 week. That's terrible. They have 20, 25 years old, and they don't think about the future because they don't have it. They don't have it. They have a war in front of them that is becoming true in Europe as a new battlefield, only because European governments want that. Nobody's asking them except the United States. Neither Russia, neither China, neither India, no one from the rest of the world. So we should apply one of the quotes most known in this country. We should forget the West and try to discover the rest. We have such a great opportunities. In Italy, Italy is loved by everyone. Let me say. You're all laughing because it's true. Because it's true. What are we doing with our culture? What are we doing with our future? We must solve this problem. So that's why we need to open a parallel diplomacy, using also the academic studies, but starting, if possible, since the mandatory studies, since the high schools, since middle schools, to impress in the youth the desire of a different world order. That would be a great first step. As it happened already in the other part of the world, it could really work in our. The entire Europe is waiting for this multipolar awakening of the consciousness, the great awakening instead of the great reset. We really need it. And we ask to all the rest of the world to help us to realize it. Thank you so much.
Can I suggest
Yeah.
for this brilliant speech as, for example, one sentence, EU is a backyard of Eurasia.
Вы знаете, вот мне понравился символизм нашей сессии, и я вот подумал, мы же...
Well, I believe that symbolism is we are now at an economic forum, and we need one of the oligarchs of the international level, and some of them are present here, and the representative of China, Derek Ri, is with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to just take a few minutes. I'm in technology business, and there is a term invented by the Americans that has to do with my business called small garden, tall walls. Small garden, tall walls. It means that they want to keep the best technology in the small garden, erect very tall walls so the rest of us cannot access it, or people they don't like cannot access it. Okay, so I borrowed that concept, and I took a look and said, who are in the small garden? Who are outside the walls? And it turned out that I think two groups of countries are in the small garden. Okay, the first group are the British Empire and its 4 grandsons that had 4 genocides and established 4 states. Of course, you know who they are. The second group are essentially maybe 1,000 years ago, during the first division of Christianity, the countries that on the Western Christendom, and not you, but on Western Christendom. These are the Germany, France, whatever, and that's all there is. Okay, so these countries put together a small number of countries that, at the moment, is about half of the world's GDP, but maybe only a third of its growth. If you look at BRICS or the rest of the world, we're about half the world's GDP, but 65% of growth. Okay, so we now trade amongst ourselves more than we trade with them since last year, I think. Okay. The global South trade more amongst ourselves than with the so-called global North. So I want to turn the idea upside down. I say, I think the Americans first came up with the idea called the West and the rest. The West and the rest. So the reality is actually the world and the West. We're the world, my friends. We are the world. They are the West, which is a small garden, and they want to erect high walls. That's great. Keep them inside. Thank you.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. We still have, according to our plan, an intervention by our friend from Egypt, Aban Ali, a famous journalist who has interviewed our leader, President Putin, on many occasions, and he represents the Egyptian, Islamic, and Eurasian multipolar world.
It is truly a great honor to be able to speak to you now. I'm not going to be taking a lot of your time. Let me just highlight 2 main points. Something that you discussed before. Ms. Zaharova spoke about the children of Donbass in the western part. And we've built a parallel. We've drawn a parallel between the children of Donbass who suffered because of the coup, starting from that time in 2014, and have been suffering since now. The children of Palestine are also suffering. But now everybody's talking about what's happening in the Gaza Strip. But they keep forgetting that the war is waging not just in the Strip of Gaza, but on the western bank of Jordan River. That's where the war is going on for many years, and not a single person is talking about this. Every single day, Israel kills not just children, but women, men, senior people of different ages. So let's call a spade a spade. Let's give the real names to things. And let's not forget that the Western Bank is another territory where the war is being waged. And it didn't start on the 7th of November, it started much earlier than that. So that's one thing. Second, we are now striving to build a multipolar world. And we seem to be looking enthusiastically at the BRICS project and on expansion of BRICS. Me and Mr. Dugin today, we spoke together during the previous session that in order to achieve the outcome we need, we shouldn't forget that inside every country, there are some internal forces that are pro-Western. And those pro-Western forces are a hindrance to our project, are a hindrance to our aspirations. Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, it calls for a wrap up. The session has come to an end, and I think it was great and amazing. Thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye for now.